Welcome to Online Connect at 51. For those joining us for the first time, this is an interactive Bible study designed to be done with other people. So form a group and connect by phone, text or video call and watch this video together. Every time you see a question screen like this, hit the pause button and share your thoughts on the question with your group. After that, keep watching until the next question screen. As is our tradition at the Connect group on 51st Street in Manhattan, we always start with an opening question that gets us sharing a little bit. So today's opening question is this: describe something that you just don't understand. I would imagine that some of the responses ranged from the profound to the ridiculous. The fact of the matter is that there are many things that are beyond our understanding, and today we're going to explore more about the peace that surpasses understanding, which is found in Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 to 7. The passage reads, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." So as you read this passage, I want you to form a mental picture of who is writing this and where that person is. So your second question to share with each other is, describe who you think is writing this and the circumstances he is in. The writer of this letter is Paul, and as we look back at chapter 1 of Philippians, we can see that Paul is writing this from prison. He speaks of being in chains and being surrounded by the palace guard. Yet despite being in such dire circumstances, Paul manages to write the word joy or rejoice over 16 times. So this seems like a man who has definitely figured out how to transcend difficult circumstances. Some of you may be wondering how to cope with living in a tiny New York apartment, or are finding very little joy amidst this time of self-isolation. But Paul here seems to have figured out how to rejoice while being confined. So your third question is, how do you think Paul manages to remain so joyful while locked up in prison? It seems that Paul has the realization that the Lord is at hand, or in other words, the Lord is near or present. He knows that he is not alone and God is with him. I hope that we can take the same comfort that knowing that no matter where we are, God is right here with us. By Paul's own description, the presence of God, when acknowledged by prayer and thanksgiving, leaves no room for anxiety or fear. Paul commands us, do not be anxious about anything. So the fourth question is this: describe what it means to be anxious. What sort of things cause us to be anxious? So I bet we can all describe what being anxious feels like. A racing heart, scattered thoughts, an internal conflict of hearts and mind in endless battle. The root word of the word anxious is the Greek word merimnao, which means divided into parts or drawn in opposite directions. It means being separated into parts as opposed of being whole. When we look at this Greek word, it describes what's going on inside us when there's anxiety. Our thoughts and feelings are being pulled in different directions and we're literally at war with ourselves. Paul then goes on to describe that instead of this anxiety, we can have the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. So now we have the key topic of today's discussion and your fifth question. What is peace? Describe when you have experienced peace. Some people may have described peace as an emotional state of stillness and calm. Those with young children may have immediately thought about the peace and quiet that comes when their kids are finally asleep. Other people think that peace is the opposite of war or the absence of conflict. These are all great descriptions. However, when we look at the Greek word that Paul uses here, it is eirene, and we find that this word has the exact opposite meaning to the word that he uses for anxiety, because this word peace is derived from a word that describes wholeness, when all the essential parts are being joined together. So we get a picture of anxiety being divided into parts and being pulled in separate directions, and peace when all the essential parts are tied together as a whole. When all the right parts are joined together, our thoughts, our desires, our emotions, when they come together as one, there is peace. But also note that this isn't just any peace, this is the peace of God. So remember right at the beginning where Paul has the revelation that God is near, that God is present? So the peace of God is when there's a unity between God and us, when our thoughts are God's thoughts, when our will aligns with God's will, and when our desires are aligned with God's desires, there is the peace of God. So what's the incomprehensible part about all of this? And this is your sixth question. Why does the peace of God surpass understanding? What's incomprehensible about the peace of God? So if Paul is saying something surpasses understanding, it must be a tricky concept to get. So I think that the peace of God that surpasses understanding refers to when it just doesn't make sense that there should be peace. So there are situations that are just bad, like losing a job or a breakup, a recession, a pandemic, or going to jail that would normally make you anxious. God gives us peace no matter what the circumstances are, because as it says in Isaiah 55, his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So for Paul, his circumstance is that he's wrongfully in jail, and yet he's declaring peace and joy to us. This shouldn't make sense, but it does when God is present. So let's review where we are so far. Number 1, anxiety is when our hearts and mind are divided. Number 2, peace is when our hearts and minds are united with God. 3, God is with us always. So despite the circumstances, we can have peace when we come to him in prayer and thanksgiving. So the seventh question, and this requires a bit of imagination, is that when you consider where Paul is, what is the metaphor or the picture he is painting about the peace of God? So Paul is under military guard by the Romans. These are the best soldiers in the world, trained to defeat any army, and these are the sentries assigned to guard and protect him. It is ironic that Paul would take a picture of the most fearsome fighting force that the world has seen and use it as a metaphor for peace. He literally describes that the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. That word guard is a military word. We're not talking about how you guard a cookie from being eaten by your brother, or the way that a dog guards your front lawn. This is the way that soldiers guard Buckingham Palace, or a special forces team will guard a strategic military base. Your hearts and minds are being defended by the most powerful fighting force that can defeat the enemy completely. And that fighting force is the peace of God through Christ Jesus. For he defeated the real enemy so that we can be united with him. So the final question to share with each other is this: what are you doing to accept the peace that God is offering you?